If you're watching this, you've managed to keep breathing into the year 2023. And this season is starting off with a bang following last year's crazy silly season with all the driver changes heading into this year. At the beginning of the last season, I thought we'd only have one or two changes going into 2023. I personally believed that Nicholas Latifi was the only one whose seat was truly at risk, depending on how well he would match up against his new teammate Alex Albon. But boy, was I wrong. Before the season even started, Russian driver Nikita Mazepin was replaced by former Haas driver Kevin Magnussen. It was just proof that he was purely a paid driver, since as soon as his father's ability to fund the Haas F1 team was frozen, the team rightfully tossed him out. The season started off and Kevin Magnussen really showed the world that he could drive that Haas car better than his teammate in the early races of the season. His teammate was none other than Mick Schumacher, son of the legendary Michael Schumacher. To be fair, that's basically an impossible name to try live up to. Anyways, moving on. Mercedes driver and 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton had started off the season in a clearly slower car than the competition for the first time in what feels like forever, which surely was a big blow to his close defeat from the 2021 season where Max Verstappen barely managed to snatch his first world championship. This left Lewis tied with Michael Schumacher for the most world championships held by an F1 driver. Lewis's new teammate George Russell was showing that he was more or less on par with Lewis's performance. Despite Lewis being one of the older drivers on the grid, he continuously stated early on that he didn't plan on retiring anytime soon. As we got near the end of the first half of the 2022 season, I knew we were getting close to that time of year where smelly brown stuff usually hits the fan, but it felt oddly stable at the time. At Red Bull, it was clear that both drivers weren't going anywhere, especially with Perez sometimes even matching Verstappen in the odd race here and there early on, and while obviously Verstappen isn't going anywhere. At Ferrari, Carlos Sainz was nowhere near the pace of his teammate Charles Leclerc, but he had just gotten his maiden win in Formula 1 at Silverstone, so he seemed safe. Not to mention his contract wasn't due to terminate at the end of 2022 anyway. The Mercedes driver lineup seems super solid. At Alpine, there were questions about Alonso retiring to give his seat to 2021's Formula 2 champion Oscar Piastri, but Alonso didn't look like he was ready to retire with his phenomenal performances throughout the season. At McLaren, Lando Norris was dominating his experienced teammate Daniel Ricciardo for the second year in a row, but Daniel was adamant that he was committed to the team and wasn't going anywhere. That and his contract ran through to the end of 2023 anyway. At AlphaTauri, Yuki Tsunoda wasn't performing too great, but to be fair, the car sucked. His teammate Pierre Gasly was still contracted through to the end of 2023 as well. At Haas, Mick Schumacher was having a terrible year, but Silverstone in Austria showed that he was picking up the pace and able to score points and match the pace of his teammate Kevin Magnussen. So his seat was starting to look a lot safer than it did earlier on in the season. Alfa Romeo had rookie driver Zhou Guanyu, showing he deserved his spot in F1, and Valtteri Bottas had been happy to have started with a comfy multi-year contract with the team. At Aston Martin, Stroll certainly wasn't going anywhere with his dad owning the team, and Sebastian Vettel was very much still outperforming Stroll, even though the car was pretty terrible in the first half of the season. Finally, Williams. Nicholas Latifi was living up to my preseason expectations, while Alex Albon was bagging points every now and then despite driving a car slower than my girlfriend's Suzuki Swift. It appeared that the 2022 F1 silly season was going to be cancelled.
Boring!
But then Sebastian Vettel created an Instagram account and decided to post this.
I hereby announce my retirement from Formula 1 by the end of the 2022 season.
Now, this truly shocked me. A driver who had basically become part of the F1 furniture was retiring very much earlier than I had expected. I was going to say a bunch of fancy, wonderful things about him, but Josh Revel posted a nice long video about him that I'll pin in the comments below. By the way, while you're down there, maybe click on the button that looks like an upside down thumbs down button. I don't know why, but it makes me feel better. So this got me thinking up some crazy conspiracies. Is Vettel making way for Mick to bag a seat at Aston Martin? Well, it didn't take long before Alonso kicked my theory in the nuts and announced that he signed a multi-year contract to drive for Aston Martin. Naturally, the question of whether or not Oscar Piastri would have a seat for the following year was answered by that move as Alpine announced that the Australian would be driving for them. It was then in the early hours of Australia's morning that Oscar Piastri decided to break the internet with this following tweet. I understand that without my agreement, Alpine F1 have put out a press release late this afternoon that I'm driving for them next year. This is wrong. I have not signed a contract with Alpine for 2023. I will not be driving for Alpine next year. After that crazy mic drop, we all wondered, where the heck is he going to go to? Is he even planning on racing in F1 next year? The top three teams all looked locked in for 2023, and the only other team that was competitive with Alpine was McLaren, which also had their drivers locked in. And the other teams weren't anywhere near the pace of the Alpine car to warrant burning bridges with Alpine like that. Anyways, it turns out that the CEO of McLaren, Zak Brown, was very happy to do everything he could to throw Oscar Piastri into Daniel Ricciardo's seat. So despite the fact that Daniel Ricciardo was committed to McLaren until the end of 2023, he was effectively bought out of his contract and his F1 future was now in question. At this stage, there was one seat open in the F1 grid, that Alpine seat. Would Daniel Ricciardo try to go back to his old team Alpine, formerly known as Renault? It seemed like his best bet. When Alpine's other driver Esteban Ocon was asked, he expressed an interest in having Mick Schumacher as his teammate. Another name that was thrown around for that seat was Pierre Gasly, but his contract with AlphaTauri ran through to the end of 2023. Indy driver Colton Herta's name was thrown into the mix when AlphaTauri said they'd let Pierre Gasly go to Alpine if they could get Herta in their car. There was one problem though. Colton Herta didn't have enough FIA super license points to join Formula 1. AlphaTauri made an appeal to the FIA to make an exception because if you took Herta's performance in IndyCar and applied the same super license point system that Formula 2 used, then he would have more than enough points to qualify for F1. Unfortunately for all parties involved, the FIA stated that they would not be making any exceptions. If you ask me, that point system really needs to be looked at, especially in this case since Colton Herta is American and F1 is really trying to break into that American market. Fast forward to the 2022 Monza Grand Prix weekend. The reigning Formula E world champion Nick de Vries was a reserve driver for 3 teams, and that weekend he did a Friday practice session in the Aston Martin. Later that night, Alex Albon had an emergency operation to deal with appendicitis. Since de Vries was the most logical choice to replace Albon in the Williams that weekend, he hopped in on the Saturday and outqualified Nicholas Latifi. This was a weekend where many of the drivers ended up taking penalties, so de Vries and Latifi ended up starting in the top 10, which was very unusual for the Williams car. Like, even more unusual than you subscribing to my channel. Shortly after Crofty's
And it's lights out and away we go!
Latifi fell down the order as expected. However, something very strange happened with de Vries. He held position, and lap after lap he kept holding position. By the end of the race, de Vries had finished 9th and bagged 2 points in his debut F1 race. In the same moment, he effectively signed Nicholas Latifi's death certificate in Formula 1, as Latifi finished 15th out of only 16 finishes. De Vries was suddenly everybody's hot topic. Would he take that open Alpine seat? Would he take Mick Schumacher's seat at Haas? Would he replace Latifi at Williams? The F1 world was his oyster. In the end, Alpine and AlphaTauri were clearly negotiating because it was eventually announced that in 2023, Pierre Gasly would be driving for Alpine and Nick de Vries would be driving for AlphaTauri. At this stage, we had Oscar Piastri and Nick de Vries in, Sebastian Vettel and Daniel Ricciardo out. As we got to the end of the seasons, the big questions were, who is going to replace Nicholas Latifi, and will Mick Schumacher keep his seat? There were rumors going around that Aston Martin reserve driver Nico Hülkenberg was looking to take Mick's seat, and that Mick would really have to pull out some dark magic to keep his seat. In my mind, I thought Mick might manage to take Latifi's seat to stay in F1. At the US Grand Prix, Williams announced that Nicholas Latifi would not be driving for them in 2023, and that Logan Sargent would be driving for them if he managed to secure enough super license points. Fortunately for Logan, a lot would have to go wrong for him to not secure those super license points, and in the end, he did get them. At the penultimate race of the season, Mick's coffin was sealed as he qualified last and his teammate qualified in pole position. It was an awkward day with weather and red flags that led to that outcome. Nico Hülkenberg was officially announced to replace Mick Schumacher at Haas for 2023. So now we can officially say that this will be our 2023 lineup. At Red Bull, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez will keep their seats. The same goes at Ferrari, where Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz will keep their seats. And to no surprise, at Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton and George Russell will keep their seats. The last remaining change is Alfa Romeo. Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu aren't going anywhere. At McLaren, Lando Norris will keep his seat and Oscar Piastri will be entering Formula 1 for the first time. At Alpine, Esteban Ocon will keep his seat and Pierre Gasly from AlphaTauri will be joining him. At AlphaTauri, Yuki Tsunoda will keep his seat and he will be joined by Nick de Vries, who will be entering F1 for the first time full-time. At Aston Martin, obviously Lance Stroll will be keeping his seat and Fernando Alonso will be joining him from Alpine. At Haas, we have Kevin Magnussen keeping his seat and Nico Hülkenberg will be returning to F1 to join him. Finally, at Williams, we have Alex Albon keeping his seat and Logan Sargent will be entering F1 for the first time to join him. As for our drivers leaving the grid, what will they be getting up to? We have word that Nicholas Latifi has secured a 2023 IndyCar seat. Daniel Ricciardo will be Red Bull's mascot in 2023, taking the role as third driver. Mick Schumacher will be the reserve driver for Mercedes, which he sees as his best shot to get back into F1 in 2024. Sebastian Vettel hasn't really announced what he'll be getting up to in 2023 aside from his plan to race in the Race of Champions event with Mick Schumacher for Germany at the end of January. If you'd like me to cover the team principal silly season chaos, let me know in the comments below, and I hope you've enjoyed this video and thanks so much for watching.